Hey everybody, today we're taking a quick look at Unity's particle system, and we're just going to go over some of its basic features. I've got here a little project that I made, I think for the tutorial before last, but I thought it was a nice blank slate just to mess with some stuff. So what we're going to do is go up to here, Game Object, and create empty. This is a placeholder object, and it is way more useful than you might think it would be at first. I use it to hold almost any prefab with any animation, which allows you to move that object separate to its animation, which is pretty awesome. So we're going to go up here to Add Component, go to Effects, and select Particle System. It's going to play this for us in real time, and we can see that it's immediately emitting particles because it has some base settings here for us to work with. First things first, we're going to affect the renderer down here just to make it look a little more appealing. And we're going to put a different material on it. I'm not sure if I have any materials that'll work nice in this project or not. Let's see here. Yeah, those look pretty good. And I just did that by over here in the Render tab, selecting the material, and then adding a new one there. So let's pop up here and see the different settings we have. You have duration, that is the lifetime of the actual simulation, and that ties into the looping here as well. So if you have it for 5 seconds, after 5 seconds it loops back into itself, whereas if you toggled this off and restarted, then after the playback time equals 5 seconds, it should stop emitting particles. And we see that it stopped, and then each particle at 10 seconds, then the last one should die off there. So we're going to switch, keep looping off. The pre-warm can be kind of a cool one. Let's see here. Yeah, so the pre-warm can be useful if you want a particle effect to already be in that position. So you can see the difference whenever it's restarted. The simulation acts as if it's been going all along relative to that initial kind of explosion of particles. You can also affect the individual lifetime of each particle, so we can still have our simulation for 5 seconds, but maybe have our particles live for only 1 second, which gets us just a nice little 1 second lifetime on each particle, and then we can adjust the speed as well. So right now it's automatically set to 5. You can just play with that. We'll try doubling it, and maybe cutting it in half. We'll leave it at 5 for now, that's fine. You have a couple other settings that you can mess around here. Some of the big ones, so your start size, you can actually in real time adjust your particle size there. And then you also have rotation. That's not going to come into play much with something rounded like this, but it can depending on what you're working with. The start coloration can be pretty handy depending on, again, what you're working with and what you're trying to do. Another big one here is the gravity modifier. So you can set this, we'll just go 1. And I believe the way it works, so normally gravity would be, what, 9.8? Yeah, I believe the way it works within Unity is for the particle system, 1 is just 1g, I think. That's what seems right anyway. And as you can see, it's fallen right through our terrain here, but we can actually change that down here in the collision tab. Just activate collisions, and because we're working with our world objects here instead of specific planes, we're going to hit world and then go down to 2D, and our particles will automatically bounce and impact with all colliders, which is pretty cool. But you see that it's moving with the particle system, so you can actually affect those up here in your simulation space. So right now we're in a local space, which means all of the particles simulation occurs based on its initial spawn point. So if that spawn point changes, that simulation will stay within that range. So we can switch that to world, and you get a much more interesting effect here. As you see, the particles essentially are unparented or act individually of their original object, which is pretty nice. Most of the things I work with are going to be using world space. Let's see here. We also got our simulation speed, so this can be handy for a lot of things. It really depends on what you're working with. You can turn it up, have some really craziness, or turn it way down, have some slow-mo particles. Simulation space, we just covered that. Let's see here, simulation speed. Not too worried about that. Alright, let's pop down here to emission, because this is a big one right now. Essentially you have three different methods of emission. You have a rate over time, a rate over distance, and then a burst. They are all useful for different things. So right now we're doing a rate over time. We have it set to 10. So we could drop that down to 1. See that it's just one lonely particle every second or so. We could pop it up to 50, and then we have a ridiculous amount of particles coming out there. And then we also have the rate over distance. So I'm going to turn this to 0, and it won't emit at all, but the rate over distance will pop that up to 50. Just like it says, will emit particles based on the distance that your base object moves. We'll drop that down a little bit. Alright, then on the emission we also have our burst, and this is really handy for explosions or things breaking apart. You can affect a lot of things here, so you have number of cycles, the counts per particles, the interval in between the cycles, and the probability. I wouldn't worry about that too much. One really cool thing you can do with the count here is actually have a random between two constant numbers. So you can select this drop down tab and go down to random between two constants. This, instead of giving you a single determined number of particles to emit, gives you a random between whatever two numbers you want. So right now we have it set to 30. Let's drop it down from 3 to 300. And now we have a massive range of particles that can be emitted. So it gives you a nice variance. You see that first time it exploded with probably close to 200 particles, and then the second time only 3 or 4 particles. So it can jump all over the place. I'm going to switch this off, so subtract that, and go back to rate over time, just so we can see our particle effect while it's working. And we're going to pop down to shape. This affects essentially the shape of the object that your particles are emitting from. You can have these determined by an actual model. A mesh renderer, I'm pretty sure that's what it is. But in most cases, you're going to be fine using a couple of the other ones. But you can see, depending on what you choose, you'll get a different effect. And depending on the particle and its behavior, you can really visualize that effect. Because these are all going straight down, you're not going to be able to see it as well, so I can just switch our gravity modifier to 0, and then have our start speed something a little higher. There we go. Now you can really see how much the shape affects the way the particles are spawned in. And you can mess with that depending on what you're doing. This would be great for like a 2D game vent smoke coming out, something like that. Let's see, radius you shouldn't have to worry about too much. That's for tweaking that shape. Mode, I believe that is, okay, just how they're coming off of there. So you have a couple different things you can play with to get pretty different effects. So that's how the particles are distributed whenever they're being spawned, based on the normal of the shape. Usually random is what you're going to want to be going for. Let's see, a couple other really cool things. So you have a force over lifetime. That can be kind of fun. Essentially, it's pretty simple. You can just push the particles over their lifetime in a particular direction. To kind of shape them and give them the effect you want. You also have a color over lifetime. That works the same way as the start color. It just is based on the actual lifetime of each individual particle. And again, you can use a random between two gradients in this case, but it works just like the number factor. Color by speed, that should be pretty self-explanatory. If you have a randomized speed output on your particle system, then each particle could have a potentially different speed, so you could have that speed affected by the color range there. Size over lifetime, again, should be pretty self-explanatory. You can actually go in and edit these. Oh, there it is. So you can have them start out really big and kind of taper down. And there's handles for you to be able to affect these curves. You get more of a kind of fiery effect there. Let's see. External forces allow you to use external wind zones and things like that you would be able to use for a lot of things within the Unity engine. So if you turn that on, you'll be able to affect those settings, but we're not going to mess with that right now. Noise, however, is one of the really cool ones, so we're going to turn that on. Now what this does is it sort of works like a normal map. You see your preview over here, and it will essentially affect the forces on your individual particles while they're in motion. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with this. So over here you can determine how much that affects them. So we'll turn this up to like 10, and you can see we have a massive effect on these particles. We'll turn it down to something like 0.5. Much less of an effect. Now what I'm going to do is slow down our simulation speed a little bit. Say by half to 0.5. And bring our particle start speed down a little bit. And a really cool thing you can do with this is have it scroll. Here we go, scroll speed right now set to 0, so we can change that to something like 5. That's pretty fast. 1. Alright. So now what's happening is this texture that's shifting in real time is going to affect our particles, and you can do a lot of really cool stuff with it. Just by kind of messing with these settings. Let's change the strength to 10. And you can have it affect different aspects as well. So you can have it affect the size. Right now it's just set to position. You can have it affect the size as well, 0.5. And we'll again slow that down a little bit. So you can see just by tweaking a few of these, you can get some really crazy effects. Another great one to look at is going to be SubEmitters. These things are fantastic. It gets a little bit more complicated, but essentially you can determine, you can have each particle be its own individual particle system. So you have to build a new particle system for this. I don't think it's a good idea to use the previous one, but you would literally just add in another particle system. As a matter of fact, let's just do that real quick. We'll take our original empty object here and just select it, hit Control D. Now we have two of them. And then we'll come back over here to our original one. And in the SubEmitters particle system, we'll select our new object we just made, Game Object 1. There we go. Had a little hiccup, but you see we got some really crazy effects going on there now. What we've done is combine those two particle systems. So we just had it auto-parent to the original object. So whenever it spawns in, our initial particles, if we pop down here, we can see the settings. It's going to spawn in the same particle system, but from a different object. And we can have this effect in a bunch of different ways. So on death might be a good one. We switch it over to collision. And this would cause it to spawn more particles as it collides with objects, spawning in those sub-emitter particles. Oh, I'm going to use that for something. Alright, so we got some pretty good effects here. It looks like we've gone over just about everything. The only other one we're missing major, the lights. That literally just has your particles emit lights. There's a bunch of settings here, and you need to assign a light to it. That's not hard. Just pop up Game Object, Create Light. Our project is 2D, so that's not going to have an effect on this, but we'll leave that alone. Trails, they can be pretty fun. You activate those and they get pretty crazy pretty quick, but there's a bunch of settings, and again, you can affect how that looks over in the render panel here. So we'll just pop down, grab something like that. As you can see, we're already getting a really interesting kind of special effect looking thing going on here. You can tweak these in a couple of different ways. Now the ribbons right now look awesome, but for some things they look really good. Most of the time I end up going with particles. You've got your ratio, so that's essentially 1 is a 1-to-1, so for every particle there's going to be a trail, and you can increase or decrease that. Your lifetime for your trail, so you can have it independent of the particles. World space, that's fine, doesn't matter. Your texture mode can definitely have an effect on how this is looking, so you see whenever we switch it to tile, instead of having that kind of stretched, skewed look, it's tiling that texture out, which really doesn't look that good. So you get a few different ones to mess around with there. And then, just like the other modules, we have color over lifetime. Let's see, generate lighting data. You have a couple things you can tweak here. So color over the trail actually affects the distance of the trail. It'll have more intensity of that color and then kind of fade out. So if we make it super green, you'll see as the trails start to get towards the end, they're less green, a little more transparent. I'm just going to switch that back. And then one last thing that is important to keep an eye out on, specifically if you're doing a 2D game, is your order in layer. That's going to affect, so essentially where it is, because it doesn't matter on your axes going towards the camera. If it's a 2D game, orthographic camera, it's all going to look at the same depth, and it's up for you to create that sense of depth based on how you layer things and how things move. So I'm going to pop that back to a -5. You see that now goes behind our objects there, whereas if I pop it up to something high like a 10, it is going to overlap and go in front of all of our objects. Anyway, that's a quick overview of the Unity built-in particle system. I hope this was helpful. I hope you had a good time. If it was, please like, share, and subscribe. Check out some of my other videos. Have a great day and stay safe. Bye now.